You're gonna love those playoffs. Coming up, two best friends made a pact in the 7th grade. 7th grade. To meet on a street corner. Now, nearly 30 years later, find out. Yep, looks to me like they met there. Back in a moment. Well, you know, sometimes it takes years to fulfill a promise. Anthony Moore and Tony Weissman were best friends in the 7th grade. 7th. We got the 5th grade, the 9th grade, the 7th grade. Boy, you're really geeky in the 7th grade, right?
Yeah, you got that right.
I know. When they made a pact to meet on a Chicago street corner on Tony's 40th birthday. 28 years later, I bet a lot of us have done this, and then we forgot. What was the day again? What year did we say we were going to... Okay, 28 years later, they were living thousands of miles away from each other, and it looked like their promise would be broken. Take a look at how Anthony honored his pledge with a surprise twist.
Anthony and I were passing notes back and forth in 7th grade music at Francis Parker School.
So we made a promise. We made a pact. We wrote it out right there. We said at noon, January 19th, 2000, which is Tony's 40th birthday, we would meet at the street corner, the intersection where we grew up.
It just seemed like an outlandish thing to promise one another because we were 13 at the time, and of course, the year 2000 seemed like forever. And the bet was for $100. And then over the years, we stayed in touch a bit. But I actually thought he'd forgotten about it.
So as the years wore on, somehow that document has disappeared. But I never forgot.
And over the years, we never really talked about it much, and I didn't think about it too much. But as my 40th birthday approached, I did start to think about it. I lived in Chicago at the time, but he was in San Francisco, and I didn't think he'd do it.
Logically, it made no sense for me to be going to Chicago on January 19th, 2000. First of all, we planned a vacation, and we were going to come back on that Tuesday. I was supposed to then be in Chicago on a Wednesday. Well, that wasn't going to happen.
About a month before the day, he did email me, and he asked me if I'd let him off. And I said, sure. I said, you know, it's a blessing that we're still friends.
And he said, why don't we just make a point of telephoning each other at that point, you know, at that hour, at noon, Chicago time. I said, that would be really nice. I said, I'll have my cell phone on, and we went on our vacation. Got back on a Tuesday night, and I listened to a message on the voicemail. And it was a friend of mine from school, and he would say, I can't believe you're not going to be there.
To keep your promise. Tony's going to be there, you're not.
And I heard this message, I'm like, oh, there's no way Tony would do that to me. He wouldn't do that to me. I'd feel guilty the rest of my life for having broken our promise.
So I made arrangements with another friend from school and my wife and son to meet at that corner. And then I called him just so that he could be there in spirit. And I said, Anthony, I win. You lose the bet. I was like, what are you talking about? I said, it's noon. I'm at Pine Grove in Wellington. You lose the bet. He said, I don't lose. And I look up. And there he is on his cell phone walking toward me on Wellington. And I almost passed out. It's the closest I've ever come to having a heart attack. I honestly couldn't imagine that was him standing right there.
It was all about friendship. It was all about, there was nowhere else in the world we should be. We made this promise years ago that we were going to be there at that moment. And we had, it was almost like a fantasy.
Cool. That's cool. So you brought your wives there? You brought your wives there too?
I brought my wife, Tracy.
You brought your wife, and you know, she was crying her eyes out. I heard she cried out of contact lenses.
Well, we were stunned. We were sure he was in San Francisco, and we looked up. It was just so exciting, and she cried her contacts out.
Cried her contacts out. That's pretty good. So was it the phone call from the other friend that got you to do it?
Yes, it was my friend right up here, Bob Rivkin, who said, you're going to be a chump if you don't show up. He's going to be in the street corner. I would have never been able to live with myself if I hadn't been there.
Yeah, so you feel good that you kept the promise.
I feel, my wife told me, friendship is more important than anything else. And she...
That is the truth. That is the truth. Anthony, I hear you think Tony still owes you money because you kept the promise?
Yeah, as I remember, the document, which we've lost, said that I'm owed $200.
Well, those aren't the facts, actually.
The facts
The bet
are...
was for $100, and if you didn't show up, not only did you lose the bet, but whoever did show up could go anywhere in the world to find you to collect and get his expenses reimbursed.
Well, I understand there was a witness who signed that pact that you made back in 7th grade.
That's true.
Tom Campbell?
Tom Campbell was one of the... He lives in Maine now.
Okay, Tom is here. No. Tom is here. settle this confusion.
Nobody owes you any money.
So Tom, let's settle the confusion, Tom. What's the deal?
No money.
Because what was the bet? What is the bet as you remember?
The bet was $100 and whatever it took to find you and get to you.
I
That
trust
is-
you,
You didn't have to
Tom.
go very
Tom
far.
Campbell, I believe Tom.
Tom Campbell. That's really cool. That's really cool, guys. Remember your spirit when we come back. That's cool.